Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman, and in this week's episode of the Life After Sugar podcast, I'm taking another question from a listener who was asking me, Netta, what do you eat? Give me an idea of what you eat in a day or in a week. Because I get it. I mean, it seems pretty mysterious what someone who doesn't eat sugar and flour would actually eat. I mean, what's left? And, I remember way back in 2015 when I first cut sugar and flour and when I got this list given to me of basically whole foods that I now just call food. And I looked at it and I thought, I can't imagine making meals and eating day in, day out, just with these ingredients, really. I didn't really see them as things to eat in and of themselves, but rather as ingredients. And funnily enough, that's stood me in good stead since, because I've been thinking a lot about this over the last 7 years. And here's what I've realized. A lot of us put together all kinds of ingredients to make different types of recipes and dishes. I mean, I did that all my adult life, but we never actually question whether we would ever eat the ingredients separately. And for me, that way of looking at my food has made a huge difference. So in today's episode, I'm going to answer that question, Netta, what do you eat in a day and in a week? And obviously, I don't eat the same things every day or even every week. I like to vary what I eat. But hopefully, this episode will give you an idea and inspire you to see that eating real, unprocessed whole foods, which naturally excludes sugar and flour, is not only fun and yummy, but easier and simpler than you would believe. So, as I mentioned just before, I didn't do this on my own. When I first cut sugar and flour in 2015, I did get help. And a big help for me was being given this list of real whole foods, like a grocery list. And you wouldn't think I would need an actual list of real foods, but I mean, I was like most people. My definition of food included more food products than actual food ingredients. And I didn't really know what whole foods meant at all. And since then, of course, I've read dozens and dozens of books, not just about sugar, but about the food industry and how we as consumers have been influenced in our definition of what we think food is, which includes all kinds of manufactured and engineered products that have been developed in a lab way more than grown or raised in nature. One of the books I read was by Robb Wolf, and Robb Wolf developed what he calls a food matrix because he recognized that one of the challenges that people most frequently voice when they first adopt a whole foods diet is not only I don't know which foods to buy, but I don't know how to cook. And then the next complaint would be that people get bored with eating real, wholesome, unprocessed food. It's almost as if food is only fun if it contains sugar, or if it comes in a box or a packet or something. So Robb Wolf created this food matrix template to show how easy it can be, even for non-cooks, to cook wholesome meals, and also to dispel the notion that eating real food is boring. And I've been using his matrix for years. In fact, I don't actually use it anymore for myself because it's become second nature, but I do include it, with permission, in the After Sugar Club membership for my members. Basically, his food matrix is for those in the I'm easily bored with what I eat category, as well as the I don't know what to eat category. And he says that if you master the food matrix template, you'll discover that with this simple list of foods, you'll be able to create enough unique meals to never see the same meal twice in over 200 years. Sounds crazy, but he shows how, and this is pretty much what I follow every day and every week, so that my meals are varied and I never get bored. Basically, he says that you only need 4 ingredients: 1 protein, 1 vegetable, 1 fat, and 1 spice. And just with his list of unprocessed proteins, vegetables, fats, and spices, you can create thousands of different meals, and you don't need to dirty lots of pots and pans, which means that it's simple and quick. All right, what about some actual examples of this matrix? So let's say we're talking about unprocessed proteins. I personally am an omnivore. In other words, I'll eat animal-based proteins as well as plant-based proteins. I've never been vegetarian, but I used to eat a lot less meat, and I used to be chronically anemic. So actually, red meat for me is really, really good for my health because I'm no longer anemic. Plus, I really, really like it. So let's say, for example, an unprocessed protein would be chicken or beef or salmon, or my favorite meat, lamb or duck or turkey or pork or shrimp, or because I'm up in northern Canada, moose, venison, boar. We have friends who are hunters, so our freezer actually does contain wild game meat. But you get the idea of animal-based proteins. And for plant-based proteins, it can be tofu or fermented proteins like seitan and tempeh, quinoa, lentils, edamame beans, nuts and seeds, as well as beans and pulses. These are just a few examples. Robb Wolf, in his matrix, gives 27 examples of animal-based proteins. And he gives 24 examples of vegetables, like, in alphabetical order, asparagus, avocado, artichoke hearts, Brussels sprouts, beets, carrots, celery, zucchini, and so on. And I personally would add fermented vegetables or cultured vegetables to the mix, like my sauerkraut and my kimchi. And of course, I still eat fruit, although not a whole load of fruit because my tastes have changed to the point where I just don't enjoy sweet tastes anymore. And most fruit is just too sweet for me. But I do like to cook with fruit, and sometimes I'll add half an apple to a sauce or some flavoring to a sauce like orange or lemon. But from real oranges and lemons, not flavors. And I don't use fruit to make desserts because I changed my habits and I just don't eat desserts anymore. I don't finish a meal on a sweet note, not because it's bad, but just because it wasn't serving me. I felt that I was getting through the meal as quickly as I could so that I could get to the sweet part, whereas now I've learned to really appreciate my meal and not use it as some kind of stepping stone to something else. Again, I'm not saying fruit is bad. I don't think any foods are good or bad. So even if Robb Wolf doesn't include fruit in his list, I would include it, but the way I use fruit is just a little bit with a main savoury dish. And that gives even more variety. For unprocessed fats, he gives some ideas such as coconut oil, olive oil, macadamia oil, avocado oil, and lard. And there's also butter and ghee. And I make my own, which I teach in the After Sugar Club membership too. I also love cream, heavy organic cream. That's delicious. I don't have a problem with dairy myself, but I choose not to drink milk anymore. And I also don't actually like the taste of alternative milks or nut milks, but I have nothing against them, and if you want to use them, go ahead. I'm also a big fan of fermented dairy, which I make myself, like my Villi yogurt, which is a mesophilic yogurt culture that ferments at room temperature, so you don't need a yogurt maker, as well as milk kefir, sour cream, and creme fraiche. Yum! And I'm known for my love of real good cheeses, not just French cheeses, but local cheeses as well. I love discovering new, gooey cheeses, and even the stinky ones. For herbs and spices, Robb Wolf gives 25 ideas. For example, basil, dill, garlic, ginger, curry, oregano, rosemary, thyme, bay leaf, and salt and pepper, of course, plus other examples. So in the chart in his matrix, he gives 27 proteins, and these are just animal-based proteins, there's plenty more, 24 vegetables, and again, there's plenty more that exist, 5 fats, and there's more, and 25 herbs and spices. So he calculates that if we take one item from each column, we get 27 multiplied by 24, multiplied by 5, multiplied by 25, which equals 81,000 different meals. And he says that if you divide that by 365, which makes for one different meal per day, you will not see the same meal for 221 years. So no reason to say that A, you're bored, and B, real foods that you make real meals with are repetitive and boring. Now I want to tell you about some really exciting news. And I'm so excited to introduce you to my new partner for this podcast, Medicine with Heart, which is an international functional medicine clinic specializing in difficult chronic cases of hormone imbalance, Lyme disease, mold illness, and digestive dysfunction. You can sign up for a consultation with their team to see if they can help reverse your disease. Find out more about them at medicinewithheart.com. All right, so let me give you some real-life examples of what I eat in a day or in a week, and just to let you know that when I make meals, which are sometimes just ingredient assembly rather than actual cooking a meal, and even though I used Robb Wolf's matrix right at the beginning as a guide, now it's become pretty much second nature. So before I cut sugar and flour, I used to get up in the morning and I would need to eat something right away. I couldn't wait a single minute. I had to have my coffee, I had to have some kind of breakfast, or I would be in the worst mood ever. But actually now, sometimes I don't eat until lunchtime or even later in the afternoon because I'm not always hungry in the morning. But when I do eat in the morning, I usually start off with a small glass of my homemade kombucha, and I let mine ferment for at least 4 weeks. So there's no residual sugar or very, very little, and it doesn't taste sweet at all. And then I have my coffee, and we have a lovely espresso maker that grinds the coffee beans. Oh, it smells so good in the morning. If I'm eating later, then I'll have black coffee. And if I'm eating in the morning, then I'll add some organic heavy cream to my coffee. I use organic cream because it doesn't have additives. And I really, really enjoy a bowl of my Villi yogurt, which is plain yogurt that takes me about 10 seconds to make and 24 hours to ferment. I make it with organic 10% cream, so it's lovely and creamy. And I add some ground chia and flax seeds because that's the type of fiber that my body responds to best. I add about 1 or 2 tablespoons of that to my yogurt. A little bit of nut butter. Hazelnut butter is my favorite. Sometimes a little raw cocoa powder or some nuts or a little bit of fruit like a couple of slices of green apple or some berries. Raspberries and blueberries are my favourite. I also make a really, really simple chia jam, which is basically just fruit mashed up, mixed with whole chia seeds. You mix them together in a jar, you put the jar in the fridge overnight, and the next morning the chia seeds will have absorbed a lot of the liquid and kind of act like pectin would, and you have a lovely, thick, delicious jam. I put that on my yogurt too. And another favourite of mine is chia pudding, where I mix up coconut milk, or you can use any other type of milk or cream, with some fruit, or a few drops of vanilla essence, and whole chia seeds. Mix them up, put them in the fridge overnight, and the next morning you have a lovely thick pudding that's not too sweet and will keep you going for several hours. So you may notice that I don't eat any bread or any kind of flour-based products like pancakes or bagels or crackers, not in the morning and not any time of day actually. Again, I'm not saying these products are bad, I'm just saying that I don't find that I digest them very well, and quite frankly, I've lost the habit of eating them and I don't miss them anymore. I'm perfectly happy and satisfied with what I do eat in the morning. And on weekends, my hubby makes us eggs with either sausages or bacon or ham or something, or smoked salmon, and we eat that with my kimchi or my fermented sauerkraut. And when I eat all this in the morning, because these foods have a high nutritional density, in other words, they're nutritious, and don't create a blood sugar spike, which means my insulin production is level, there's no spikes and crashes, I don't actually feel hungry until dinner time. So I've lost the habit of eating lunch, and sometimes if I don't eat when I get up in the morning, my first meal of the day will be at lunchtime, and sometimes it's later. In fact, I've actually stepped out of the paradigm of meal times, breakfast in the morning, lunch at midday, dinner in the evening. I used to believe that this was how you're supposed to eat, and now my body tells me when it's time to eat. And I never have that feeling of, I've got to eat now, I'm starving. I used to have that all the time. And I used to have to snack mid-morning or mid-afternoon or both just to get through the day. And I haven't had that, I've got to eat now feeling for over 6 years. I've really learned how to listen to my body, how to listen to my hunger signals, how to recognize what's real hunger as opposed to what's just blood sugar spikes and crashes. And that was quite a long process. And it was actually only possible for me when sugar and flour weren't getting in the way of those signals and when I'd had enough practice listening to my body. And just like learning a new language, I had to practice and practice until I became fluent. In other words, until I really started to understand which foods nourish me and fill me up and which foods don't, and when I'm hungry and when I'm not. And because I experienced what I now know is appetite correction and being fat adapted, where my body is using fat for energy rather than foods that turn quickly into glucose, I didn't suffer awfully from cravings except right at the beginning, and I didn't feel the need to snack much except for the beginning, which was basically just out of habit. In fact, it took me quite a while to step out of the 3 meals, 2 snacks a day paradigm and realize, hang on, I don't even want to eat now. So intermittent fasting, which I'd never heard of when I first cut sugar and flour back in 2015, intermittent fasting came naturally to me, and I was doing it easily and naturally, even if I didn't realize I was. And all of that was because I wasn't spiking my blood sugar with sugar and flour or any type of sweet foods. And what I've learned since, which I didn't know at the time, was that the foods that I eat that are highly nutritious and that are basically whole foods, well, these foods don't stimulate the hunger hormone called ghrelin like highly processed sweet and starchy foods do, and therefore the satiety hormone called leptin is able to do its job to tell my brain, hey, I'm full, I've had enough, I can stop eating now. Which is why fasting is so natural and easy for me. It's not because of willpower, it's not because I'm some sort of magical unicorn, it's just because I know which foods nourish me and fill me up and don't stimulate my insulin, and those are the foods that I choose to eat. So basically, when I eat 2 meals a day, I eat the type of breakfast that I just described, and our family dinners are really important for me, as much for the food as for the conversations and the laughter that we share together. So if there's one meal that I would choose to eat in the day, it would be our family dinner. And for the family dinner, I'm the one who shops for the food and preps the food and cooks the food. So it's got to be quick and simple. And although I don't expect the others in my family to eat exactly like me, the bottom line is I'm the one cooking, so they eat what they're served. And for the rest of the day, I don't have much say in what they eat, although because I'm doing the shopping, the food that's available in the house is pretty much whole foods based, with a few exceptions, like my husband and my daughter eat bread or bagels, and that's just fine with me. Live and let live. So basically, this is how I approach meal prep in air quotes, because I'm really bad at prepping meals ahead of time, but I am quite creative in finding ideas for meals. So let's say I start off with a protein like beef. Well, with ground beef, I could make meatballs or hamburger patties or spaghetti sauce or stuffed peppers or cabbage rolls or meatloaf. With stewing beef, I like to use my Instant Pot pressure cooker because it turns cheap cuts of meat into really tender stew. My family loves steaks, so when we do eat steaks, I like to make all kinds of different sauces for variety. Or I cut beef into strips and we have a Mexican night with fajitas for the family and I just eat the filling. There's lots and lots of different ideas, and then as Robb Wolf says, when you add in different types of veggies and salads, as well as sauces and herbs and spices, just with one type of protein like beef, you can have dozens of different meal possibilities. And I know it's really difficult to imagine not including starchy sides like pasta or rice or potatoes for every meal. I mean, we eat potatoes, just not very often and not very many. But I had to change that lifelong habit of always including a starchy side. And the change itself was not always easy. But once it was done, once my mindset changed, quite frankly, nobody in the family misses those sides. And if my daughter does want pasta from time to time, I make her pasta. But it's really gone from 3 or 4 times a week, like she used to eat, to maybe 3 or 4 times a month now. Very often I'll serve the protein with 2 or 3 different types of vegetables, either cooked or raw in a salad. If I'm cooking the veggies, I'll cook them in clarified butter or ghee that I make myself. Or if I'm cutting up vegetables for a salad, I'll use olive oil, lemon juice, and sometimes a little balsamic vinegar as a dressing. Or I like to mix up a little bit of sour cream, a little bit of cream, and some herbs and spices and garlic to make a creamy dressing. And I add different types of herbs. And basically, I have hundreds of variations of protein, fats, veggies, and herbs. Enough for over 200 years. All right, I could carry on all day giving you 101 examples of exactly the types of meals that I eat, but you get the point, right? The basics are all unprocessed whole foods, unprocessed proteins, either animal-based or plant-based, unprocessed fats, like olive oil or butter or ghee, unprocessed vegetables, including fermented ones, low sugar unprocessed whole fruit, and herbs and spices. And there are thousands of different variations you can use these ingredients for without ever needing sugar or flour, without ever feeling bored, and without ever saying, "I don't know what to make for dinner." And just a quick word about dessert. You may have noticed that I didn't mention desserts, and that was also a lifelong habit that I managed to change over time because I'd always finished a meal on a sweet note, and I had to really think deeply about why. And in fact, when I stopped taking it for granted that a meal has to finish with some kind of dessert, I felt so liberated because then I get to choose how I decide to eat. And this change allowed me to really appreciate my meal and be really mindful without always expecting the good bit to come later. The good bit is right now, and that for me feels really empowering. I hope the information in this episode has been helpful for you. I hope it's inspired you, and if you want more tips, then subscribe to my Life After Sugar YouTube channel. Come say hi on my Life After Sugar Facebook page. Check out my Instagram account to see pictures of what I eat and what I do so that you can see that it's totally possible to live a fun, varied and active life and eat different things every day instead of repeating sugar and flour every day. That's at My Life After Sugar on Instagram. And check out my website aftersugarclub.com for lots of free resources, including my simple guide to getting more energy. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on the tab Simple Guide. And if you're an intermittent faster, download my 5 tips for getting rid of cravings so that you too can make your intermittent fasting lifestyle easy and natural. And check out the After Sugar Club community and become a member to get all my recipes and much more, including my framework of how to really break free from sugar, which is much more about changing your mindset and your relationship with sugar and even your taste buds so that your life is so full of sweetness that you don't need, miss, or want sugar anymore. That's aftersugarclub.com and click on Join the Club. And if you're enjoying this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and give it a lovely 5-star rating and leave a review to let me know how this podcast is helping you break free from sugar and live your life after sugar. And if you can share this podcast with one other person that could benefit from being inspired to start their life after sugar, then share away. And if this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe so that the podcast appears magically in your podcast player every Sunday. Thank you for listening. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.